I was born in a little town, Ripley, Mississippi, and I had a wonderful childhood. I have two sisters, and we were surrounded by relatives and cousins and grandmothers and aunts and uncles, and my grandmother lived up the hill, and she always had something cooking, and my father and mother were wonderful, sweet people. My father was a lawyer, and we owned, my mother and my grandmother owned the movie theater. Back then we called it the picture show. And we would go to the picture show every night and every Saturday for at least hours and hours. And that was back in the Shirley Temple days and Elizabeth Taylor, and they had wonderful movies back then. The cowboys, and it was just a great time to grow up. We had the drugstores that we went to after school every day. My mother was like a charity. She went about doing good. That was before they had welfare. And she found all these people that needed help, and she spent most of her time helping other people. And at that time, there were not too many people that drove cars, but my mother drove, and people would come to our door asking my mother to take them to different places, to the hospital. And she was just a wonderful person to help other people. And then another funny thing that she did, we had a cemetery, and she knew where everybody in the cemetery was buried. And people would come to our house and ask her to take us up there. And one day a week in the summertime, people would go to the cemetery to clean the graves. And Colonel William Faulkner was buried in the cemetery in Ripley. He's a famous writer. And he had this statue in the cemetery, and he had books behind it. And they always told us if you counted the books, you would die. Of course, everybody was going to die, but that was just a story they told us. But we all thought my mother owned the cemetery too. But I had lots of cousins that would come, and we had, my grandmother had a barn, and we would play in the barn, and she had a big pasture behind her house and had cows and horses and animals. And we just had a great time growing up.
Well, I was born in Faulkner, Mississippi. That's 7 miles north of Ripley. Of course, Ripley is the county seat of Tipple County. And I had my daddy bought a farm when I was about 4 years old, and our payment was $100 a year. Gave $2,700 for it. And Mr. Simon Finger, who lived in Ripley and who lent money just sitting out in a straight chair, you didn't sign a note or anything. If he believed in you enough to loan you the money, you didn't have to sign a note. My dad borrowed $2,700 and bought that farm. And I was raised on the farm, and a very nice house. A doctor had just lost it. He built a new house there, and but he wasn't able to make his payments. A doctor. So I don't know how Daddy thought he could make his, but anyway, the house is still there, and we enjoyed living in a nice house. And I always, as I grew up, I liked to ride horses. I had a saddle horse and a quarter horse. And if you're out in the country, you have to kind of create your own entertainment there. And I was very fortunate. I had a fellow living right next door to me there. His dad had the mail route, Route 1 and Route 2. and he got like, this is when there was no money. He got like, I remember him buying a car for $550, a new car. Took his old car and put it on the route. But they had plenty of money, and they used to take me to the show, and it was 10 cents, the show that Ann's talking about. And then finally I made friends with her aunt, and instead of paying the 10 cents, I went around to the side door and she unbarred it and let me in free. I always appreciated that. And I grew up, had a good time. My daddy was had a 3-man school board back then at Faulkner. And I played basketball. And Sunday afternoon, we used to drive up and had curb service at the drugstore. You just drive up there and honk your horn, and they would come out and put a little thing on the side of your car and take your order. Well, I was up at the drugstore one Sunday afternoon, and this cute little girl came out of the drugstore, and I was about in probably 10th, 11th grade, and she was a couple of years younger. And I never will forget, she had on a green pinafore dress. So I just said to my dad, I said, who is that little girl? And said, that's Ann Street. And I remembered that. So when Ann got a little older and could date, we started dating and dated in high school and for a long period of time. And I went on to the Army and stayed a little over 30 months. And went to Camp Shelby, Camp Walters, Texas. And then I went down on maneuvers in Louisiana. I never lived, I always wanted to camp out a little bit, but we went 60 days without being in a house. You live 60 days out in the wilderness. And never did in all my Army thing understand why we needed to stay out there 60 days, but no cooked food for 60 days. And went from there to England, and from England to, this was, I don't remember how many months after D-Day. We went up, and my outfit started, I was in the infantry, and my outfit started fighting in Aachen, Germany. And we fought in Belgium and Germany and Holland, and walked within 20 miles of Berlin, and was tough, and saw a lot of bad things happen, and just thank the Lord that He spared my life. My parents all lived in in other words, all the Muskellies and all the Hoppers lived in a 4 or 5 mile circle there. Mother had 13 brothers and sisters, and my daddy had one brother and one sister. And they all belonged to the Primitive Baptist Church. And we had church every first and third Sunday. And Primitive Baptist, you know, you don't have any music in there, you just sing. And then you have dinner on the ground after the thing's over with. My mother and daddy, in studying the Bible, concluded at that time they didn't believe in foreign missions, and didn't believe in educated preachers. Said the Lord would tell him what to say, you know. So my mother and daddy pulled out and joined the Baptist church in Faulkner, and when I was about 12 or 13 years old. So we turned out to be missionary Baptists, believing in foreign missions and all of that type thing. And I enjoyed going to Union University, and I didn't study much missions up there at that time because I was just out of the Army.
Was there any characteristic that your father instilled on you?
Yeah, as we would be working on that old equipment, you know, he called me Bud, He said, now there's 2 or 3 things you don't want to do. He said, don't fool with no bad women, don't gamble, and don't drink no whiskey. He'd tell me that about every day. And it stuck with me. I didn't gamble, I didn't fool with any bad women, but I did drink some beer.
What's your favorite memory of either your mom or your dad?
My mother was a real, her people were, my granddaddy, Paul Hopper, was above intelligence. My mother was a smart lady, and Daddy's people were just intelligently kind of run of the mill, you know. But my mother's people were, especially her dad, was really, really smart. He's way ahead of his time, and I remember they had the commercial appeal. He was the only fellow in Faulkner, Mississippi that took the commercial appeal for a good long while. They mailed it to him from Memphis, and people didn't take papers back like they do now, you know. And he was a kind fellow, and he and some more guys started the Bank of Faulkner way yonder. And I got real smart and bought up a bunch of those shares after I got a little money, and the bank took bankruptcy just about 2 years ago. So I lost all my shares. My mother, of course, we farmed, and we made our own molasses, raised our own sorghum. We had a little dairy, and I have a carpal syndrome now. I think it's from milking cows, but something. We milked and sold milk, and raised hogs and calves, and just the 2 of us. We didn't have anybody a long time to help us. And finally, we did something that's very unusual back in that time. I had a black family that lived around the corner there. It was good people, and the mother died, and then about 6 months later, the daddy died. They had a boy exactly my size and my age. And they said, who's going to take care of Cornelius? None of the black folks wanted him. My mother and daddy took Cornelius, and we raised him. It'd about run you out of town for that now, but I grew up with a black. We rode bulls together and worked and played together, and I mean, he lived with us and stayed with us for 30 years. He married, Daddy built him a house, and he stayed with us, lived on the farm there, grew up there from 12 years old, and lived with us for 30 years. Kind of unusual. People didn't think anything about it, really, you know. And my mother and Daddy always told us that we weren't any better than anybody else, to be nice to everybody, and I try to do that.
Oh, I'll have to tell you about my grandpa Shannon. My mother's grandfather was Robert Shannon, and he had a big country store up at Tiplersville, Mississippi. And he put in the first telephone line. He started at the Tennessee line, and he would put a son in Ripley, one in Blue Mountain, one in New Albany, and one in Pontotoc, and strung the telephone lines from one end of the state to the middle of the state. And they had a wonderful business back then. And then he sold out in about the time of the Depression, 1930, and his son invested in the stock market and lost most of the money. I think the children finally got some money out of it, but I thought that was really an entrepreneur for him to do that. And then when they saw the telephone business, they all went into the optometry business. So I have a lot of cousins and relatives that are in the optometry business. At that time, I think you went to Chicago and learned how to fit glasses. And that was, and then they had jewelry stores. But that was my mother's mother. And we all called her Mama Pittner. And she always wore a big hat. And she was quite a character. She had 10 children. My mother had 9 brothers and sisters. And they were all quite characters. I can't tell you all the stories about them, but we were a really close family. And my mother and my grandmother were completely opposite. My mother didn't care whether the bed was made or the dishes were washed, and my grandmother was a fanatic on keeping everything just so-so. And she was a wonderful cook, and my mother didn't care. She'd go to the grocery store and buy food, and just, she didn't cook much, but she spent all her time helping other people. And I went to, after I graduated from high school, I went to Blue Mountain College, a girls' school, and that was during the war. And then I went to Ole Miss, and then I got married, and we moved to Starkville, and then moved back. There were 2 places I said I'd never live, and that was Pontotoc and Okolona. So we moved to Pontotoc and taught school there for 2 years. And then we moved to Okolona. When we moved to Okolona, I had 3 children and was expecting another one. And I didn't know how I was going to make it with all those little children. My daddy prayed that I would get a good maid, and he sent me the money to have a maid. She was half Indian and half black, and she never let a scratch get on any of my children. And Howard was having trouble getting the right kind of clothing in the ladies' store. And somehow I had a knack for buying ladies' clothes. So I started working in the store and purchasing, going to market and buying ladies' clothes and jewelry. And we really had a fantastic store back in those days. It was very unusual. And I just kind of had a knack for buying the right clothes and the right jewelry. And now I have a daughter that has a clothing store. And she loves to buy clothes and jewelry and purses.
She doesn't have the knack that her mother had, though. True.
But I have 5 of just the brightest, finest children. We never had any trouble with any of them. They're just very unusual. The boys have all married well and done well, and the girls are just fantastic. I have 13 grandchildren, and my oldest daughter has a son who's a professor over at Sanford College, and he has 3 adorable children, and we really enjoy them. And Chip has 4. No, Oscar has 4 children, and they are just wonderful, precious children. And Tommy has 2, and Chip has 3, and we're so proud of them. And I don't know, the Lord has just been so
Amen.
good to us. I just feel like that He has blessed us in so many different ways that I could never quit praising His name.
How important is it for you to instill values into your grandchildren?
That's very important.
That's,
And I think my children have done a wonderful job instilling values in them. And I think they'll all turn out to be successful and a blessing to other people, which is what's really important. And they're all filled with love and goodness, and that's very important.
Do you do a good job of spoiling your grandkids? Because that's what grandparents are supposed to do.
Well, we didn't, we're just not the type grandparents that they just bring them and leave them with us, you know. We were always kind of busy, so we probably didn't spend as much time with or haven't spent as much time with our grandchildren as a lot of people. They, you know, bring them, leave them for a week or two, and of course we always had a business, and but carrying our children to Sunday school and church, and letting the Lord turn them over and letting the Lord help raise them, and they're doing the same thing with theirs. All of our my sons at one time were 3 deacons in the same church, and my daughters work tirelessly in their church, and they're married to 2 wonderful Christian men, and it's just amazing how smooth that part has gone. We hadn't had anything bad to happen, and Lord, just give him all the credit.
Amen.
And,
Howard, what was your favorite childhood memory?
you know, I guess riding horses. On Sunday after church, we had big clay hills up there, and we would meet up there, about 10 boys about the same age, and we play follow the leader. In other words, you get on your horse and you go till he couldn't climb any higher and probably fall, or one we didn't get killed, and whoever was the last one in was the winner. And we look forward to it. It's kind of dangerous, but Daddy didn't know he was doing it, of course. But I had a wonderful quarter horse, and just enjoyed that.
And what about you? What was your favorite childhood memory?
Well, after school, all of my friends and would go to the drugstore, and we would sit around and talk, and everybody would come in, and we would just have such a fun gathering and talk about what we were going to do that night and what was going on at school, and what we were going to wear the next day and things like that. And we just had so many good friends growing up, and we had such a wonderful time. It was just real unusual. And it was just a place that everybody congregated and had a good time, and we drank a soda and just experienced fun.
How did the Great Depression affect your life?
I remember very vividly, we had a cotton crop, and cotton went down to 8 cents a pound, 500-pound bale. 8 cents a pound. And Daddy said, I just can't sell it. And we had a porch, went across the front of our house and all the way down the side. And he filled that porch up with those bales of cotton. He had it ginned and put there. And he waited about a year, and it went to 11 cents. And he sold it. But the Depression, as my daddy's theme song. Oh, we can't afford that, bud. No, sir. So I kept my overalls clean and everything, but didn't get many new ones. And my Christmases were pretty light there. They're like $2.98 something. It was, people don't understand, but there was no, if you could get a job for $1 a day, my daddy worked for $1 a day at the gin. And it was really bad during those days.
I don't remember, ever having to do without anything, but we didn't spend a lot of money. But people didn't have charge accounts then, and we always had plenty for some reason. My daddy had sold, he had on the electric department. He and some more friends had put in electricity back before I was born, a big station, and had the first electrical company. And he had saw that kind of during the Depression, before the Depression. And we had, you know, plenty of money, but he lent a lot of that money to people that were going to college, doctors. I know 3 doctors in particular that he lent money to go to school, and they never paid him back, which was really sad. And even the doctors back then hardly made enough to get by on. But it didn't seem to bother people that much, you know. I guess there were people that really went hungry, but I didn't know that many people that, I know my mother gave groceries to people that she knew that were hungry, and they started, I guess Roosevelt started the welfare system about that time. And I remember people going to I think they called it the Red Cross, and went to the Red Cross to get food. But people just didn't have as much, but it didn't bother them. They enjoyed what they had and made the best of life. And it was really unusual that nobody had a lot, so it didn't bother you.
All right, let's go back to that moment. How did you meet?
Well, of course, the first time I saw her was when she came out of the drugstore there.
Go back to that day. Kind of tell us about that.
Well, we were just having a Coke float out there, and me and my date, and so I waited till she got a little bit older, not much, and I used to...
I think we double dated.
Yeah, we double dated once or twice, and seemed like that fellow was having more fun than I was.
So you wanted to date his girlfriend?
Yeah. And so back then, you didn't take the key out of your car ever, and really couldn't even lock it up. It's a 1937 Ford. And the girl I was dating lived up on a little hill there. And they got pretty bad to get my car out of gear, and they'd roll it down. I never have found exactly who did that. Ann lived down at the foot of the hill, and they would roll it down there and turn it into her driveway, and when I came out to go home, my car wouldn't be there. And then she said her girlfriends did it, but I was writing her a letter during the war, and some of them got in my other girlfriend's front yard, and never have been able to unravel that exactly.
So the very first time you saw her, you were
I was impressed, yeah. And we dated a long time, and she went to the bus with me when I went to the Army, and just kind of thinking about her all during that time.
good reason to come home.
Good reason to come home. Inspired me.
You know, it's real funny. We've lived through almost the horse and buggy days to the jet age, which is really, we had trains. I remember people coming to Ripley in horses, you know, in buggies, and had wagons, you know. They'd come to town and buy their groceries in a wagon and park their wagon on the square in Ripley. And I had an uncle that was mayor, and he made people stop parking their animals on the square in Ripley. And then I remember the train coming through. We had it was called the Rebel. And the Rebel came through early in the morning and then at 10 o'clock at night. And after the Rebel ran at night, you were supposed to come home after the Rebel ran. We'd all go down to the depot and see who came in on the train. That was a big deal, you know, a little town. And I had an aunt that lived in Jackson, and she would come up on the train, and we were so excited when someone would get off the train, and it was fun to travel that way. And then the airplane. I remember the first airplanes that came to Ripley, and for $1 you could go, they would land in a pasture out, a couple of blocks from my house. And you could go get a ride on the airplane for $1. People would come and light their airplane, and you could travel around for $1, and we just thought it was, but my mother and daddy wouldn't let me ride in the airplane. But now it's just really unusual for people that haven't seen the difference in transportation and the difference in the way people do things, and the revolution of the telephone and the revolution of the TV. It's just marvelous how things have changed. You just can't believe, it's just a different world almost from what we grew up when we were children.
How did he propose to you?
Well, let's see.
I just kind of did a little bit at a time, And so I was going down from Union University. Incidentally, that train that she met there was the one that I would catch at Faulkner and go to Union University and back on. And so I was going down to Mississippi State to start school, and I saved a good bit of money during the war, and then of course they paid for my college education and gave me a check, and by the time I went to Mississippi State, I'd spent most of the money, hadn't I, Ann?
I think so.
And anyway, we got married and moved down there, and I had 4 children and didn't have one in school. And that's the reason Ann is still tired, I think.
What was your wedding like?
Well, we had a home wedding at my mother's house, and it was a lovely wedding, but I had my sister for maid of honor, and Nell Howell sang at my wedding, and it was just a beautiful little small wedding because we were going to college, both of us at that time. And
I didn't know anything about weddings, of course, and my brother-in-law, her older sister's husband, told me, the day of the wedding, said, you might ought to leave your suitcase at my house. Said, I don't know whether you know it or not, but said people, play tricks on you and do all this kind of stuff there. And I said, well, I sure thank you. So when I got to the Hotel Peabody in Memphis that night,
that's where we had our honeymoon.
My silk pajamas was tied up in a knot about big as your fist, and all my clothes was messed up.
Rice was.
He was the one that played the trick. I had the confidence. I was pretty angry when I had those new silk pajamas, and had been put wet and tied up in knots. But
So Ann, was it love at first sight?
Well, kind of. Yes, I guess it was. Kind of a spark. Definitely a spark at first.
Howard, was it love at first sight?
it was. And I went to school at Union University from a guy from Ripley. And of course, he was about 2 years older than Ann, about my age. And he went back and told all my friends about, he just made up stories about what Howard's girlfriend did over the weekend. He was home, and if I didn't go home, he told all my friends about, they all went out together, and I hope it all wasn't true, but.
What was it like raising a family in the early days? for you guys?
Well, Oscar, my middle son, said that he didn't understand till he got married and had a lot of children why I went to the Lions Club one night, PTA meeting, board of directors at church. He said I was gone every night and said he didn't realize the importance of that till he had 4 little babies.
Well, I had help with the children, and they were all good, and it seems like we didn't have a lot of money, and our friends didn't have a lot of money, but everybody got together at night, and we'd have a dish supper, and the children would enjoy that, and all of our other friends had children. We'd get together, and they had fun playing, and all the children liked to come to our house because I would let them play, and we had a playhouse in the backyard, and the girls loved to play dolls, and the boys played ball all the time, and it was just something going on all the time at our house. And I had a wonderful cook, and on weekends I never knew how many children were going to come to visit. We'd make a big pot of spaghetti because we didn't know how many people we'd have for dinner on Friday nights. And on Friday nights, when the children were teenagers, they would go out to the park. We had a wonderful park with a pavilion, and they would have a band. In fact, Elvis Presley would come to our park and play. And it was just a wonderful time to go out, and the parents would go out and chaperone, and they had a swimming pool. And one day, I think I was home, and Howard was playing tennis, and Oscar was out on the swimming pool, and he fell off the diving board on his head.
High diving board.
And it was just unheard of for somebody to do that and not be hurt. But he was not hurt very bad, and they woke us all up, and Howard came in from the tennis court, and he survived. It was just a miracle.
It was a really high diving board.
But Oscar was always getting in trouble. He was the Chip was a real good child, and Tommy was a real sweet child. Okolona was a wonderful little town for our children to grow up in. You didn't lock your doors, you didn't lock your cars. Everybody knew everybody and loved everybody, and the children had lots of freedom, and it was just fun. It was a fun time to grow up. That was in the 40s and 50s.
It's obviously Christmas time now. Did they ever want any unique present? Do you ever remember a present that you gave them for Christmas that they really enjoyed?
Chip wanted a Rocky Horse once, and he talked about that Rocky Horse. And of course, they got up and had Santa Claus. And I remember going in there, and Chip was on that Rocky Horse, buck naked. He didn't have any clothes on. He was riding that Rocky Horse. I don't know how come him not to have any clothes on. That tickled me.
The girls loved dolls, and they always got dolls for Christmas and clothes. And
I think we'll tell them about that time. We went home from work and couldn't put out Santa Claus yet because some of them were still up, you know. We didn't close the store till 10 o'clock on Saturday night and this holiday. And so we heard oldest daughter crying, and she was upstairs. Says, "What's wrong, Pam?" She said, "Santa Claus hadn't come yet. It's about 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning." We overslept. We got to put out Santa Claus. Ann said, "You get back in that bed. Santa Claus will come." She says she watched us get it out of the trunk of the car. Anyway, I don't think they thought much of Santa Claus after that. Oh,
Oh, wow, that was great.
yeah.
What has been the key to success for your marriage?
Uh,
Never getting mad at the same time.
never get mad at the same time. And Ann is easy to live with. She just says, Howard, that was the most stupid thing I ever heard anybody doing. I don't understand why you did it. And that's the last time she'll ever mention it. She don't wait next month and bring it up again, and so on and so forth. And then when that's over with, it's back to normal. And she's been, it's really been a happy marriage for me.
Don't go to sleep at night without forgiving each other.
That's right, no. And the church has a lot to do if you work and teach and busy in the church and your children in the church. That's kind of what we build our life around. And
Try not to ever be mean to anybody, or.
no. And
And we're very forgiving. I don't think we've ever had anybody do anything that was hateful or mean to us that we didn't forgive them.
How important, you mentioned the church, how important is Jesus Christ to your life and your relationship?
everything. I've been a
I think
deacon
he
in-
has made our lives complete and perfect. We've had an almost perfect life. Really have. We've had, some ups and downs, and hadn't always run smooth, but he's always brought us through. And we're so thankful. And we've been so blessed.
And we don't miss a service in the church unless we're hindered in some way, We go to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and I guess it takes a good bit of preaching for us. And we have a wonderful church, and the next Billy Graham's a pastor there, 28-year-old young man, just unbelievable. Best preacher I ever heard. And we're really enjoying our church there.
When did you guys come to know the Lord?
Those denominational schools, you have chapel 5 mornings a week, and you're associated with a lot of preachers. Over half the school was people studying to be a preacher. And so, you had association with them, and it's just a good climate. And I've thought about it a lot. When I was in the service, I believed in God and Jesus Christ a long time. But I guess you're not completely sincere until you give your life to Him. And I did that at the Faulkner Baptist Church. And Ann was Methodist, and she can tell you about hers.
Well, I grew up in the church and went to Sunday school every Sunday, and had a wonderful church and church family. And my daddy was Baptist and my mother was Methodist, and I was always a little bit, because I loved my daddy. He was just so special and so good. And he was, I guess, one of the best people I have ever known in my life. But I went to church with my daddy one Sunday after my uncle had died. And I think I went down to church because I love my daddy and because I love the Lord. And I think that was a change in my life at that time. But it was an experience, because my mother was Methodist and my sisters didn't like it at all because I had joined the Baptist church with my daddy. It was kind of a dramatic time for me. And I've never understood that, but anyway, it was just because I love my daddy so, and he was so special.
He was special too.
And he never let us want for anything.
Going back to World War II, obviously being young and being so far away, and you being separated when you were dating. Tell us a little bit about what it was like for you at such a young age to be out in such a dangerous part of the world.
Well, luckily when you're 18, 19 years old, you're bulletproof, you know. You don't, I mean, you know you could get killed, but you know, if you took somebody 30, 35 years old, that's the reason they get these young people. They're just not, they don't think about death as much. You know, to them, death is not gonna happen, you know. I'm 19 years old. And you get scared when you're fighting, when you get in these bad places. But the next day you go right back at it again. And I think being young has a lot to do with it. But war is truly hell, I'll tell you. It's bad. I saw my best friend got shot through the heart while we were as close as we are together. And we were trying to take a town up there. And that could have been me. But I've always felt bad because I didn't go. He was from Detroit. I didn't go there after the war and tell his mother and daddy. We were friends for a long time over there. And I always felt like I should have gone. They would love to have heard all the details about it, because all they do is just, you know, bury you over there and you don't know any of the details about how it happened. The most exciting thing I saw was we crossed the Elbe River, and we weren't supposed to cross it, but we didn't get those orders. And we were about 20 miles of Berlin, and they told us to turn around and start coming back to the Elbe, and chasing us was the Germans, but they weren't trying to kill us. The Russians were after them, and they were trying to get across back over into the back across the Elbe River into the American section, so they'd be captured by the Americans. And I've got pictures of all of that. And they had a pile of guns big as this house here. They'd swim the Elbe. They'd do anything to get over, because the Russians were, and they didn't take prisoners, you know. They just killed them. You couldn't surrender to the Russians. And that was real exciting to see those Germans, and they weren't thinking about fighting this thing, but trying to get somebody that would let them live.
Was it tough when you got back?
It was, seemed like it was a good time, really. You had such a, you know, such a change and such a relief to be back home. And then, you know, you had a little money that you didn't have when you went in the Army. And I'll have to tell you this, I need to get this recorded. Your dad would go with you to register at the office where you signed up for the Army on your birthday. And my dad was with me, and Mr. Jones said he's about 135 pounds and wore horn-rimmed glasses, little bitty guy, but pretty stern. And he said, "Now, Homer," he said, "your son is on the farm and y'all have got a crop together. We're giving the farm boys, where they just have one assistant, one son, a 6-month deferment." My daddy straightened up in the chair and he said, "Mr. Jones, we don't want a 6-month deferment. We want to do our part, don't we, Bud?" I said, "Yes, sir." I never will forget that. He was that patriotic. He's willing for me to go because he thought it was my duty. And we don't have that as much now as we.
But seems like after the war, there were such good times. All the boys could go to college on the GI Bill. There were plenty of money, and it just changed everybody's lives, and everything began to build, and the world became just a fun place to live in again.
Yeah.
How proud was your dad?
Oh, he was really, really proud, and I never shall forget when I returned there. He was plowing out right beside the house. Had a little acreage there, and he was about half down the road. He stopped the mule and ran all the way. Wonderful time. We were trying to capture Crayfield, Germany, and there's we'd call it Mississippi, a little mountain range, but it's really just a high rolling hill that kind of went up each side of it and circled up there, and we were down in the valley, and they had guns, of course, they was all set for us there, and they had a SS training camp that we were trying to capture. And there's 5 people from South Carolina, Mississippi, Georgia, and we called them the Redneck Rebels. And nobody couldn't move. And of course, in the Army, you get up and run zigzag and then hit the ground again. So we just, under that fire, we just decided we're going to be killed if we do this, if we just stay here. I mean, it's putting shells in there and everything. And we'd crawl on our belly, and then we'd jump up, all of us at one time, and run zigzag and then hit the ground again, run about far from here to the end of the wall there and hit the ground again. And when we got up there, they had a foxhole dug, and they had 3 Germans with machine guns in there. And I never will forget his name. His name was Fellers. He's from Tennessee. And we jumped up, and we was going to run in the barn. And those folks raised up out of that foxhole, and he just took that grenade and threw it over in that foxhole. That's cruel, but we went in there, and they had machine guns sticking out of the building. Nothing but went in and threw those grenades in the wall, down the wall. And we would have got an award for that, the 5 of us, but our platoon commander, or platoon leader, he was a first lieutenant, and he went crazy after that, and they had to take him away. So never saw or heard from him again. He had just battle fatigue. It just tore him up. That was the most upfront thing we ever did. And by us 5 of us doing that, the rest of the folks could come then. And nobody got killed. No more got killed.
What was going through your mind during that?
Mostly self-preservation. I was saying, if I stay here, I'm going to get killed. And we might be able to get up there and we didn't even see that German machine gun, 3 folks there with a machine gun, until we were right up on it. And they raised up. They'd shoot a while and then go back down, you know. And they raised up to shoot again, and Phyllis put that grenade on them in there. And it was, and I had another time the Lord looked after me. It had been raining for about 3 days, and we were, what we'd do every morning would do what's called jump off. It was this part of the war where we were just taking wide paths at a time, and we would have a single file from here to Jackson, Mississippi, a soldier. And at 5 o'clock, everybody just raise up and start walking and shooting, going toward the towns, you know. And we got under heavy bombardment, and those 88s, and we all hit the ground, and one landed about far from here to that camera in front of me, and it was a dud. Knocked water and mud all over me, but it didn't go off. So.
You've thought about that a lot, haven't you?
Yeah. Sure have. Had one battle where they killed a lot of Americans and we killed a lot of Germans, and we weren't that far apart. I never knew how they did this, but they called ceasefire, and they let us come over there and pick up all to change. In other words, they let us get all of our dead folks that they had killed and take them back in the ambulance, wounded and everything. And we did the same thing for them. And when they got through taking them back, about an hour and a half, started firing again. That's the only time I ever heard of that happening. And
what was the hardest day for you over there?
Well, I guess that trying to take Crayfield, Germany was the hardest. We took that in Hanover, Germany, was 2 very, very bad days. And about the saddest day, or one of the saddest days, the war was just about over. And we had a little outpost down there, and people were doing some firing at just some targets. We weren't in combat really. And one of the American soldiers walked out, and that fellow fired at that target and shot him right through the temple, like the war was over the next day. And I just thought about how unnecessary that was, and shouldn't have happened, but a lot of bad things happen when you have a war. They never bother to explain them.
What effect did being a part of the greatest generation have on your life?
Really never thought much about it as being the greatest generation, but there was, to me, the people that were about 2 or 3 years older than me caught more of the tough things. I had some cousins, 3 cousins that went a couple of years before I did. And to me, they had the toughest time they had poor equipment and seemed like it was worse. Their fighting was worse than ours.
All right, let's talk about business, shall we? What is your philosophy on business?
Ann, you won't answer that?
Well, I think be fair, be honest, be straightforward, give your best to your customer, and make your customer happy, and just enjoy being in business. Enjoy your role and be helpful and serve people, serve others.
You can, in a small area where we were in the clothing business, it was absolutely necessary that you do business with the same people over and over again because you didn't have unlimited customers. So I remember one time a lady, a fine lady too, she brought some cowboy boots back and they cost $2.98. What we sold them for cost me $2. And anime rifles. And the sole was worn out on them. They were just worn out, that's all there was to it, you know. And most people wouldn't have brought them back, but she did, and I didn't give her a new pair. And she had 3 more children. She never bought another dollar's worth at my store for that $1 of profit that I lost all those years that she bought for her children. How much profit did Howard's lose? A lot. In a bigger city, it's essential that you get repeat business also, and I think we're doing a good job here at Muskelly Furniture in getting people to come back and getting
Making your customer happy.
happy. Yeah.
Talk about how you got involved in business in the first place.
I taught school and sold stuff, clothing store on Saturday, and that's the way we got in the business. And I bought a small Jewish store in Okolona and stayed there 4.5 years, and then the big store, the real store in town, lady was up for sale, and we bought that. And I might say that in both cases, sometimes ignorance is bliss. I didn't know a thing about clothing. And we bought the store and then had a going out of business sale and sold enough in 10 days to pay for the store. And then when I bought Rubel's store, these were 2 Jewish people, and I paid a lot of money for that store was 2-story. It wasn't just really a fine store. And I sold enough in 30 days, took in enough money, and I still had $65,000 worth of stock left. And had the building, $65,000 worth of stock. And
At that time, that was a lot of money in a small town.
yeah. So I really didn't know what I was doing, just did it, and evidently they didn't either. Or maybe that's just the best price. And something kind of funny happened. There's 2 guys there, Mr. Fisher and Mr. Lassiter. One of them had a hardware store and a furniture, and the other one had a dime store, and they had lots of money. And the lady went to see them. Of course, richest people in town, you'd go see them. She wanted to know if they'd be interested in buying their store. And they said, how much? And she said, $50,000. And said, no, I wouldn't be interested. Went to the other one and said, how much? Said $50,000. I said, no, I wouldn't be interested. And then I bought it. And they said, Miss Lotta, you said $50,000. We didn't know you meant the stock of goods too. We thought you were just talking about the building. So you need to ask some specific questions when somebody comes to sell you something. They would have certainly bought it. It had a huge inventory. And so that was another good break for us there.
And give us your thoughts about those years and the role you played in everyday trials of raising a large family.
Well, you just kind of have to buckle up and be brave and ask the Lord to help you. So I can't do it by myself. And
Get a good maid, don't forget that.
and we were all happy and healthy and had some really good times together. And we were all a loving family, and the children helped each other. They all called the oldest daughter Pam. She was kind of the second mama, and she and Marty helped with Tommy, and they loved the boys, and we just had a great family relationship, and a loving time and a good time, and they were always good children, and had a lot of friends and had a lot of things going on. They loved to play and they loved school, and it just worked out great.
Each individual child, and I know this is going to be hard, what are you most proud of them for?
Well, their goodness and their relationship with Christ and the church, and they have all tried to help humanity in one way or the other. They're all very outgoing and serve other people and are not selfish, very generous, kind-hearted, loving, and I think that's the trait that I'm so proud of. The girls are just unusually fine Christian women. They've raised, Pam has 3 children, and they're wonderful, great children. And Marty has 1 son, and he's very successful and a good Christian. And he's just married a lovely Ole Miss Christian. And and Chip and Oscar and Tommy have wonderful families and a great relationship with each other, and they love their business, and they love friends and family and church.
You know, Pam was very, we'll just call it, when she looks at this, bossy. And she was kind of there, like I said, her other mother, and I mean, she'd tell them at school if they did anything wrong, or I mean, she got after them big time. And Marty, second daughter, is she's really smart, and she was quiet type, and she did very well, and made 1B in all of her schooling, from high school and college. Had 1B, and she's ended up being a school teacher. And then Chip is always, well, the story needs to be told on him. He, about in the 8th or 9th grade, he said he believed he was tired of school. He just quit school. So I said, well, that's good. Mr. Garner is a plumber, and he said he could go to work for him, and he said, well, that's good. So Mr. Garner put him to digging ditches to run the sewer down. He did that all summer. He come back, he said, I believe I'll go on back to school this fall. I'm not going to quit school. And he's always big-hearted, always does something, and he's kind of the visionary, really. Chip's kind of a visionary, and
Oscar's a worker.
He's a detail man, and they asked him, he hadn't been in business so about, I guess they were at the room store, Howard Muskelly Clinic Center, just Muskelly's then. They said, Oscar, what's your details? What do you do at the store? He said, well, one of the main things I do is I search Chip and Tommy before they go home every night. Now, he knows where every dime is, and if you can't convince him of selling it or doing it, you can't get the money to do it. But he does a wonderful job in accounting and checking up and details.
What role do you play in the family business?
Well, now, I told them at the coffee shop that they asked me at the coffee shop a question about like that. We're about 10 of us together, and I said, they won't do anything at the store, no matter how small or big, without consulting me. And they said, reckon why that is, Howard? I said, well, Oscar said it was because I was wrong 99% of the time, and they want to know which way to go. That's the reason they asked me. So that's the way that stands.
How proud are you of your children and what they've been able to accomplish and what God has given them and how they've been able to use their talents?
It's just an opportunity of a lifetime to have, when you look, and this is not being boastful, but we've had lots of people to come to us and say, could you tell us, had little children, how you raised your children? How are y'all so successful in raising your children? In other words, no smoke, no alcohol, no long hair, no drugs, no nothing. If I remember one time Chip had a big date in Tupelo, and they said his tornado might pass through there that night. And Ann said, Chip, I wish you wouldn't go. He said, well, if you think I shouldn't go, I won't go. I mean, that's kind of the way they all were. They didn't scream and holler, and if we suggested something, they just pretty well went along with it. And of course, they said the reason they never had long hair, said they went in and told the barber just exactly how they wanted their hair cut while they were in college. And he said, I understand. His name was Taylor Buskirk. And said when they got out of the chair, they had a white sidewall. Said finally they went on and said, Taylor, why are you doing this? He said, your daddy's paying for it and I'm cutting it just like he told me to.
What are your hobbies and favorite pastimes or leisure activities?
Well, I love athletic events, and we go to those, have season tickets to all the college events, and of course used to high school, and we've traveled a great deal in our life. Hadn't been to South America or over the China way, but Europe we've pretty well taken apart, enjoyed that. And
We both played golf.
yeah.
Tell me about your golf game.
Well, I had my hand operated on. I got carpal syndrome. I don't know if this has done something wrong, the Lord's punishing me or what, but I hadn't played in since about July. And I've had, went 82 years of perfect health. And the roof kind of fell in here at 82. And I've had operation in Texas and one in Jackson, had my hand operated on, and just had several.
But maybe by spring you'll play.
Maybe so.
So are you a competitive golfer?
I have to get on a good team and get some help from my teammates. I never was a great golfer. I was a pretty good athlete, and I played basketball in college. And of course played baseball in high school and loved it. But my golf, I never could I didn't get started till I was about 30 years old, and I never did get real good at it. But I sure enjoy it being out there, outside, playing.
Talk about your love of Mississippi State.
Well, of course I went down there, and I just always liked athletics, and I always knew all the coaches. And when I went to school down there, I used to go to practice nearly every day, football practice. Just enjoyed knowing the athletes, and I've known all the coaches real good. And had one named Coach Shira. We were big friends, and he came from the military academy, West Point, and all of them are just my friends. And Coach Kroom calls me now, and just be sitting there and the phone will ring, and it'll be Coach Kroom, and we just have a nice conversation. And you might think it's because you was giving him some money. No money, never gave him a dime. If he found out you gave somebody a dime, he would never call you again. He's a straight up man. Talking about athletics, Ann and I went to something a week ago tonight. Had a Fellowship of Christian Athletes district meeting at Waverly at West Point. And he brought 6 football players with him. Had all the head coaches from every sport there. And they all sat at different tables. Had about 150, 60 people there. And to see some hood from Atlanta, Georgia, that they signed, come over and play football, and today he's a Christian, and he's out witnessing to other people. He had 6 over there like that they had led them to Christ through the football program. And now they're out witnessing, leading other people to Christ. That's strong. He made us talk, and he said, if you make All-American but lose your soul, you've lost it all. So I guess if he don't win very many games, I'll still be for him. He's such a great fella. And it's all about morals with him. Really enjoy knowing him. He's got some wonderful coaches that feel the same way as he does. But when you see people come there that's a hood, 4 years later, they've given their life to Christ, that's strong. And of course, Coach Pope's been awfully successful in the baseball field. Everybody's about caught up with him now. However, we did have one thing. We was picked last in the conference last year, and we finished first.
And then Stansberry is.
And then Stansberry is a real good friend of mine. We visit back and forth. And he and his wife are wonderful people. And he thinks I'm his daddy. His daddy passed away. And we talk about it every week. And I said, visit back and forth. And he's had he's winningest coach at Mississippi State's ever had, or probably ever will have. I've helped a lot of people go to school there and get scholarships and so on and so forth. And as Ann will tell you, I spend most of my time now trying to help other people. About every day I work, black or white, trying to help somebody in some way.
All right, tell me about the stick of butter.
That's
the story about stick of butter.
Tommy.
I think that was at Christmas time, and we'd been up late every night. I was laid back in a chair asleep, and they told Tommy to get a stick of butter and put it in my mouth. They thought that would be real funny. And he put it in there, and I just kind of woke up, and I just swung hard as I could, just, you know, swung. And I just caught Tommy right up his, right in the face and slapped him down. Well, that tickled the other children worse than him get caught. It is something they'd put him up to. They thought that was two funny things. So that was the laugh for that Christmas.
You're talking about how much you enjoy seeing people spread the good news of Jesus Christ. Is there any way that you can put into words how important the commission is of telling people the good news of Jesus Christ?
Well, that's the most important thing that we can do. I taught the sixth grade 30 straight years. We'd have about 15 or 16 in the class. And I taught the sixth grade for 30 straight years. And I really, in Sunday school, and I really enjoyed that. And they're up now, of course, have children of their own, and it's just good to see them, and how a lot of them did some of the things I told them they should do, and just to help in church is a wonderful thing. I'm a deacon and been a deacon in the church there for a lot of years, and it's just the most important thing there is. All the other things are pretty secondary. And Ann's right in there with me. She's just helpful as she can be.
How important was it for you to have Christ as the foundation of your home when you raised your kids?
Well, I just think it helped me so much. It made life so much easier and so much more pleasant, and pulled us through lots of hard times and good times. And I just don't think I could have made it without Jesus Christ.
Amen.
What are some of those spiritual markers where God really carried you through?
Well, one time when Oscar fell off the diving board, and we just didn't know whether he was going to be alive or not, and it was just a miracle. And when they were in college, and I didn't know where they were, and they were out on the highway, and I'd pray that they'd be safe. And there were just so many times in my life and their life that I would pray that God would take care of them, and He would. And I remember one time when Pam started dating, and I questioned her, and we talked about it, and she said, "Now, Mother, if you're going to walk the floor and worry about me the whole time I'm gone, I'll just stay at home and be an old maid." So life has just been a wonderful trip for us, and Jesus Christ has carried us through and made good times and wonderful times.
We tried to be good parents, just like I had wonderful parents. It just couldn't be better. And hers were the same way. And we want to be, tried to be that kind of parents for our children. Got a cute one on Tommy. Tommy was in the 11th grade, and it first rained that night and froze over, and then it snowed. So I went out and I told Tommy, I said, he had him an old car. Tommy, I said, now, going to school this morning, you've never driven in this kind of stuff before. I said, you're going to have to be awful careful. Well, he kind of raised up and stuck out his chin. He says, I hope you don't think I'm a junior in high school. I'm going to drive 3 blocks, and the snow would change all of that. And I said, well, I'm just telling you, you've never driven in the ice, you know. He's gone about 5 minutes. The marshal called and said, you better come down here to Deaton Grocery. Says, Tommy broadsided a Cadillac car down here. I went in there and Tommy said, well, I always just drive here and put on the brakes and turn right and go down that street. I said, that's what I was trying to warn you about. So the boys loved that. The car was parked fixing to come out on the street, and he didn't turn, he just broadsided it. So they laughed at him. We tease each other an awful lot, and if you do something and doesn't turn out right, well, they, in a good nature, they always didn't forget it, you know. So that always tickled us.
All right, let's go back to when you got married. For obviously your kids weren't there, so kind of describe to them what it was like. What was the weather like? How many people were there? What was she wearing? Kind of set the stage.
Oh,
so they've got a front row seat to your wedding.
Well, we got married at her mother's house and had a nice setting there. And of course, they took a log chain and put a big cowbell around the axle of my car, and it's Sunday, and how am I going to get it off of there? So when I start on my honeymoon, there's that darn cowbell dragging behind the car. Well, I went about 25 miles, and I finally found a little old shop open. He had a torch, and he cut it off of there. But now they thought that was really some kind of funny. And
well, we had a beautiful wedding. My sisters were in the wedding, and my sister's 2 little boys, Marvin and John Reed, and had a lot of relatives there, and aunts and uncles. And Daddy had 2 sisters that were always real special, Aunt Letha and Aunt Mary, and they were there. They lived up the hill from us, and they didn't have any children, so they treated us just like we were royalty. And we had a nice reception out in the yard and had beautiful flowers. And it was a lovely day in June. And then we went to Memphis and went to a beautiful restaurant that night for dinner. And then we went to the Peabody Hotel for our honeymoon. And I think we had to get back. Where we're going.
I had to study while I was there because I was in school at Blue Mountain in the summertime studying chemistry, and I had to get the chemistry off before I could go to Mississippi State. So I actually carried my chemistry book with me on my honeymoon.
So you had good chemistry on your honeymoon.
Had good chemistry on my honeymoon, yeah. And now Ann didn't understand one thing on the honeymoon there. They was having a world championship prize fight. I used to like boxing, and I wanted to listen to that. Thought that was very important that I get to hear Joe Louis and somebody fight.
And he's been watching football game ever since, or a baseball game.
What advice or wisdom would you like to give to your grandchildren, great-grandchildren, for many generations to come?
Well, just kind of like we've said before, live your life through the church and depend totally on
Love the Lord your God with all your heart.
Yeah. And
your neighbor as yourself.
And love everybody. We don't discriminate. We love everybody. And we help the people in our town, African Americans, just as much as we do the other people. And help them by had one that used to trim our hedges. His house burned, had a little shack. I helped him buy a trailer and I cleaned off the lot for him, paid for that. And just things like that make me feel good. And just totally committed to the church.
Just look forward to every day. Have a good say a prayer that the Lord will be with you through that day, and try to go out and make other people happy and give your best to everybody else, and just love everybody and be kind always, and be forgiving. Even though harm is done to you, just turn the other cheek and just love everyone.
Now, I'm big on studying the Bible. If you'll take the Bible and act like it's a book of interest instead of just trying to read a verse. And now with your computer and everything, you can read a verse and look up there and you'll have about 10 people can tell you what that verse actually means and how you can apply it to your life. And I enjoy reading the Bible. And you get to brag a little bit, don't you, in this deal?
Yeah.
Well, 22 years, first of the year will be 22 years. I missed studying the Bible 6 times in 22 years. And gives me great comfort. And so I recommend studying God's Word. It'll have a difference in your life. Amen.